Stares and Spares, your go-to for insight and opinion on two of the most talked about royal couples from both sides of the Atlantic. I'm Kinsey Schofield, and I'll be bringing you updates on the Duke and Duchess of Sussex here in California.
And I'm Katie Nicholl, and I'll be bringing you the latest on the Prince and Princess of Wales from, well, right here in the UK. There was a story in there about how the Queen had not disapproved, but had been surprised about Meghan wearing white on her wedding day, because being of that generation, you don't wear white second time round. Um, that quite interesting anecdote about Meghan getting a dressing down from the Queen after she'd been rude to some members of staff at Windsor Castle as part of the tasting test. And there were things in there that I'd been told, and I protected the source at the time. But I think enough time has passed now to shed light on some of those conversations and those recollections of Lady Elizabeth, because they are important historically. I mean, there were not many people that the Queen really confided in, probably a handful, and Lady Elizabeth was one of those people. And I think sometimes they just enjoyed a really good gossip, if I'm being honest. I think there was an element of that. And of course, the Queen couldn't do that with many people, but she could do it with Lady Elizabeth. You know, Lady Elizabeth, because of her work, because of her line of work as a party planner, she got to host and cater for some of the biggest royal events, you know, diamond anniversaries, jubilees, weddings. And of course, had a really interesting insight into what the Queen felt about Harry and Meghan. One of the things that she told me was that the Queen had given up Frogmore Cottage, which of course she did as their wedding present. And you know, if the Queen wanted to walk in her gardens at Windsor Castle, she'd be in their essentially in their garden. And it was a walk that she loved to do. And, you know, as the Queen had said to Lady Elizabeth, I really hope they appreciate this. You know, she knew it was a very generous gesture. And I think there was a sense, certainly on Lady Elizabeth's part, that they hadn't been particularly grateful and that they hadn't made the Queen's twilight years particularly enjoyable. And when you consider the Duke of Edinburgh was very unwell in hospital when so much of this was going on, you know, that caused the Queen a lot of distress. So I gleaned a lot from my conversations with Lady Elizabeth. I haven't printed all of it. I probably won't. You know, I think there are some things that just don't need to be said. But, you know, she did give a fascinating insight into the mind of a monarch. And I remember her telling me, and this was in the New Royals, that the Queen, when it came to Donald Trump, and you will remember that state visit that he did, he came to Windsor and he famously walked in front of the Queen, and she looked just quite surprised. It's absolute breach of protocol. And she said that she'd found him an enigma. And of course, we know how much Trump adored the Queen. She found him an enigma. So I think even all these years on after her death, those sorts of insights are really quite fascinating.
They are. In your Vanity Fair piece, you say of Lady Elizabeth, she tells you it's so sad that at her age, Queen Elizabeth, having managed the most amazing reign, it has been sullied. He has hurt her beyond belief. First of all, that just rips my heart out, that last sentence. But do you believe it was Lady Elizabeth Anson that felt Harry and Meghan had sullied the end of her reign? Or do you think Queen Elizabeth was concerned about that herself at the time?
I think probably it was Elizabeth Anson's interpretation, and it was based on the conversations that she had with the Queen. But I do know from the late Lady Elizabeth that the Queen was very disappointed with how Harry and Meghan chose to exit, that it was all done very suddenly. It was all executed in a way that no one, not least of all the Queen, had expected. And that idea that he could just turn his back on duty, I think for our late Queen, who had, you know, duty running through her DNA, and it was the unthinkable for her after the abdication. I just think that pained her deeply. And you know, don't forget that she loved Harry. You
Yeah.
know, she loved Harry, and you know, she would speak to Elizabeth and recall the Queen would speak to her cousin Elizabeth and you know recall the conversations that she was having with them while they were first in Canada and then in LA. And of course, she's watching her grandchildren grow up. Um, Hundreds of miles away from her, and I think that upset her too. And I think on a human level, she missed that, and she missed Harry. But I think she felt let down. I think she felt let down by how they did it.
Before we move on, I just had one more question for you. Sally Bedell Smith told me last week that Lady Elizabeth Anson, she had not written this in her Substack, but had told her that some of the cousins, some of the royal cousins were purposely excluded from Harry and Meghan's guest list to make room for some strangers, like celebrities, like George and Amal Clooney, Reese Witherspoon said, I was invited. And I said, I'm not going to go. I don't know either one of them. Lady Elizabeth's advice to Queen Elizabeth was, you know what? Let's put all of our energy into Princess Eugenie's wedding. That will be the family wedding. And I thought that the term family wedding was so important, that this would give the queen an opportunity to be surrounded by love and to feel that appreciation that she lacked at Harry, and that familiarity that she lacked at Harry and Meghan's wedding. Does that surprise you, or had you heard something similar?
No, I hadn't actually. I hadn't heard that. So it's interesting to hear Sally's perspective on that. Certainly, I think there was a lot of surprise over how star-studded Harry and Meghan's guest list was, and some raised eyebrows in royal quarters over the likes of Oprah and the Clooneys being invited when, these people were not aware of any close and meaningful relationship between Harry and those celebrities. When it comes to perhaps the more estranged cousins or estranged family members, I do remember at the time of Kate and William's wedding, that William was given the chance to sort of strip back the very official guest list that he'd been given by the Lord Chamberlain, when there were a lot of names that he didn't recognise, particularly with foreign royals and heads of states. And the Queen said, no, we rip the list up and start again. It needs to be your friends. And I think she would have wanted it to have been the wedding that Harry and Meghan wanted. And it was, they shunned the services, in fact, of Lady Elizabeth Anson in favour of a different florist, and they did do things differently. I think the Queen would have wanted them to be surrounded by their friends. I just think there was some surprise over how many celebrities there were at the actual wedding. But don't forget, Kinsey, Eugenie and Jack's wedding was quite star-studded too.
Robbie Williams?
Um,
Yeah.
that was pretty star-studded as well. They mix in pretty fabulous circles too. So it wasn't something that I'd heard, but I think there was that story in Sally's Substack, and I had also heard it, that Harry and Meghan had gone straight to the Archbishop of Canterbury asking him to marry them, when actually the correct protocol was for the Dean of Windsor to marry them with the Archbishop of Canterbury, because it was at Windsor. So it was things like that. And when you consider the Queen was such a stickler for detail and heritage and tradition, and frankly, good manners and respect, I think it's those things that disappointed her.
All right, we'll see you again next week. Thanks so much, everyone.